Sipping Good evening, and welcome to Town Meeting TV and the Democratic Primary Forum for State Representative for Chittenden 6-5. Tonight, we have 5 great candidates for you to listen to. Our format, because we have 5 people, we're going to try to give them all some equal time. And so the format tonight is we'll give everybody 2 minutes to do an opening statement. I've got a few areas that we're going to ask questions. There won't be a lot of give and take. We're not going to do that tonight because of the size of the we have too many candidates. It'll take up too much time. And then everyone will get 2 minutes at the end to do a closing statement. And then hopefully we'll send everybody off to vote as well. So my name is Howard Wooden, and you can find us at cctv.org anytime. You can go on there and find us and see a recording of this, and I highly urge you to do that. Tonight we have, you can see on our screen that we have 5 candidates, and I'll just start with introduce Tiffany. And Tiffany, how do you say your last name again?
Bluemle.
Bluemle and Scott
Yeah.
Pavek. Pavek, correct? Gabrielle Stebbins, Jesse Paul Warren, and Annie Wohland. Now, I'm just going to start with an opening statement. Tiffany, you're the first one up in my corner there. So I do have a little stopwatch, and we'll get you started here. And this is your chance just to kind of introduce yourself to the public, and you are on.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Tiff Bluemle, and I've lived in Ward 5 with my wife and 2 sons for about 20 years. Vermont Works for Women. I worked with hundreds of Vermonters who held full-time jobs, but they just couldn't make ends meet. I've seen how often systems fail the folks that they are intended to support, like requiring folks released from prison to show up at probation and parole 3 days a week in the middle of the day. Well, how do you get a job? How do you get back on your feet? In recent months, if recent months have taught us anything, it is that my well-being is linked to yours. For many of us, the notion of paid family leave, affordable childcare, universal health care coverage, and criminal justice reform got really personal. And we now have an opportunity to set the stage for broad transformative change. And that's why I'm running for the legislature. I learned as a leader of a small nonprofit that the only way to change systems was to buddy up with people. And if I have one gift for the revolution, it is this, that I'm really good at bringing people together across sectors and interests to get something done, like establishing Burlington's first transitional home for women coming out of prison. How do we do that? We began by talking with incarcerated women to understand what they wanted and needed. We assembled partners whose buy-in was critical. And we held regular public meetings to solicit the input and support of neighbors. This is how I work. I ask more questions than offer answers. I engage diverse voices and look for who's not at the table. And I'm very persistent. And with your vote, I would bring this approach and your priorities to the legislature next year. Thank you. Can't hear you.
Scott, this is your 2 minutes.
Great, I'll take them now. Thanks to everyone that's tuning in or watching in the future. Hope the future is great wherever you are. And thanks for having me. I'm Scott Pavek. If you haven't heard it before, your neighbor down on St. Paul Street. I'm running for this office because I have to. I am compelled to serve by virtue of the lived experience I bring to the table. If there were other legislators or candidates who could authentically speak to the experiences of growing up in poverty in Vermont, living through addiction, or being on the other side of the need for criminal justice reform, I might not be here. But that's not the case, and that really hasn't been the case as far as I can tell for the history of the legislature. And by consequence, we've more or less left our vulnerable and marginalized neighbors behind in the policies that we choose to not pass and the reforms that we say we can't afford just yet in the rising death toll associated with the opioid overdose crisis. Those are all the reasons why I have to run, because I've been there and now I'm not, and that compels me to give back. After 2013, getting my quote unquote second chance at life, I sought out experiences and opportunities to prepare for service. I've worked for campaigns and candidates. I've created community groups in the wake of the Trump election in 2016. I've served on nonprofit boards and provided direct service through my time in AmeriCorps. These are all important things I share with other people in the State House. But regardless of the experiences I may have that resonate or do not with you, understand I'm here to provide authentic, transparent service for you. This is something that would be the greatest honor of my life, and I'm proud to participate tonight.
Thank you, Scott. That was nicely done under 2 minutes. Annie, this is your chance. Introduce yourself.
My name's Annie Wohland, and I appreciate everyone who came out to watch this, and as well as CCTV for having this. Thank you. I'm 31 years old. I have lived in Burlington since 2009, and I consider this my home. I'm a social worker. I worked for Howard Center for 5 years, 5.5 years actually. And I've also devoted my entire young adult life, my entire 20s, to being politically engaged. And I feel like you can be politically engaged in many ways. You can volunteer for political campaigns, or you can also contribute back to the community in terms of what you do for work. And I feel like being a social worker is extremely important to me, because not only can I do I have direct service experience working in all the service areas of Howard Center, Child, Youth, and Family Services, mental health and substance abuse, as well as developmental services. I'm contracting with them. I feel like I have a significant amount of experience in terms of direct service work, but also on the political level. I have experience on the local, state, and federal level. On the local level, I've worked as the lead of Burlington's Fight for 15 from 2016 to 2018 to help ensure that a ballot advisory question was put on the 2017 town meeting day ballot to give Burlington voters the opportunity to vote if they approved of $15 an hour statewide minimum wage. That was a crucial time for that vote to be on the town meeting day ballot because that was the first year the Vermont legislature would ever introduce that bill for the very first time. And come town meeting day, it passed, by the way, the vote in terms of the city council allowing it, it passed overwhelmingly with 10 city councilors in support, 2 opposed. Come town meeting day in March 2017, 75% of Burlington voters voted in support of it. That sent a strong, strong message to the Vermont legislature that this is crucially important. Vermonters need a livable wage. And then in 2018, when the bill was brought up, it was introduced in 2017, but it was really, brought up in 2018. Both chambers passed it, and the governor unfortunately vetoed it. And so I've also worked for Senator Bernie Sanders, and I've also done a lot of advocacy work as the lead of Burlington's Fight for 15 at the State House. So that's local, state, and federal.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. Gabrielle?
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Gabrielle Stebbins. You can find more about me at stebbinsforvt.com. I am running because I have a 3-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old daughter. And when I was growing up, I believed in all the fruit and the hope and the promise that America could deliver. And I talk now to so many of our youth, so many of our elders and my nephews and my nieces, and they don't believe that. So that is why I'm running. In terms of experience, I've got a wide variety. I have counseled at a low-income women's health clinic. I have worked on human rights issues in South Africa. I've been a park ranger. I have been a community organizer, working on public safety and air quality issues. And I've also taught violin in a low-income, underserved public urban school. For the last 20 years, I've focused on clean energy and the environment because everything else I care about, if it's affordability, if it's water quality, if it's income inequality, if it's social and economic injustice or immigration issues, everything gets worse with climate change. My experience in the last 20 years, I've been chair of the Burlington Electric Commission for 4 years, and I did spend 5 years in the Vermont State House as director of Vermont's Renewable Energy Trade Association. So I have firsthand experience of how you craft a good bill and how you make it a better law come May. I think this is part of the reason, my approach, my skills, my passion, why I have a diverse array of endorsements, everyone from Mary Sullivan to our current state rep, to Bruce Cipher, who, for 30 years worked to develop the Burlington that we know it, and Vermont conservation voters. I hope you'll vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse, last but not least, you've got your 2 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you, Howard. Thanks to all who are watching. Thanks to my fellow candidates. My name is Jesse Warren. I live on Hayward Street in Five Sisters. Run a nonprofit organization called Democracy Creative, which is based out of the soda plant on Pine Street. And Democracy Creative is really the culmination of what my professional experience has all been, which has really been at the intersection of governance and policy and creativity. And that experience has been from the halls of the federal government, working for democratic leadership, to working in the music industry, to working, running the statewide re-election campaign, working with Vermonters all across Burlington, all across Vermont, running the re-election campaign of our lieutenant governor in 2018, to working in the State House as a legislative associate, coming to understand how the State House works, how policy is actually crafted in Montpelier, doing that kind of work, and then also doing creative work where I was tasked with thinking creatively to advance social progress on social issues and issues of all kinds, economic, racial, social justice. So that has been my experience. And, we launched this campaign around the idea that it is possible, which is a reference to how every time a big idea is proposed, whether it's in Vermont, whether it's in our country, there are people there who say it's impossible, whether it's abolition of slavery, whether it's women's suffrage, whether it's right up to every time we try to raise the minimum wage here in Vermont. There are people who say, oh my God, it's going to destroy everything. You can't do it. And what our campaign is about, and I think this is a really poignant time for this message, is that these things are possible to do. And we have to remember that. And I think in this moment, what we have to do is seize this opportunity to make significant progress on these issues: healthcare justice, racial justice, economic justice, and make sure we seize this opportunity to do that. I think this is the best opportunity we're going to get in our lifetimes.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate it. So listen, I'm going to combine a couple of things here to get today, because there are certain issues that I think are pretty hot right now, especially with the primary coming up. I'm going to change the order a little bit and make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk about this. But education right now is a big topic in our region right now, especially when it comes to budgets and the relationship with COVID as well. And so I'm really curious as to how everybody's going to react to the idea of where education is going normally, or what is the impact for the immediate future here and what people are thinking about. Gabrielle, do you mind starting us off there and see? Sure. And we'll start with you this time.
Sure. For starters, I think we need to, one of the questions is, what's our number one goal? Number one, we need to not be entering 2021 from a place of scarcity. If you look at Herbert Hoover, if you look at the Great Depression and that response, pulling back is not how you reinvest. We need to reinvigorate Vermont's economy. We have reserves of 14% of our expenditures. This is equal to some great resource states like North Dakota and Alaska. We have a AA credit 1 unit rating, which means we can borrow money for 3 years at 2%. When we start to see the economy come back, then we'll see more jobs and we'll see an increase in our income tax. So I think now is not the time to say, let's cut back from a global perspective in terms of the budget. I also think the state has a critical role in terms of engaging entrepreneurs and investing in the areas that for-profit companies don't typically do until they're profitable. For example, Apple needed Wi-Fi. Where did the internet come from? It came from government spending. This is the type of creative thinking we need moving forward. In terms of education, I have a 3-year-old and a 10-year-old. Children are our future, and we must invest in them. I also have 80-year-old parents, so I definitely hear the concern about property tax on a fixed income. I think we need to reach back to the many stakeholders that are looking at this problem, make sure we provide for our children, and revisit how we spend and how we collect money.
Thank you. Scott, I'm going to move over to you. You've got some background in both of these areas. So tell me what you think right now. What's the future, immediate future and long-term future of these areas?
Yeah. I'm certainly not a prognosticator, but looking at the immediate future, I think when talking to parents, when talking to people throughout the district, it's really the concern is safety, first and foremost. Safety, are we actually going to be reopening? And considering that the question of reopening is not going to be something we revisit once again in the future, and then we are done with. It is something where, given the ways in which we are preparing or not for the influx of students, particularly coming to Burlington, we are setting ourselves up for potentially reopening places and closing them in the future. Now, regardless of that, what happens is we are going to have different populations of students throughout the state who are going to have equity issues, who are going to be facing differentials in access when it comes to tele-instruction or classroom materials by virtue of access to the internet. So it's really a moment where certainly I echo Gabrielle's sentiments about rejecting austerity. So seizing this moment and understanding that we can't pull back on education. I understand that the question was originally phrased as, how do we afford this? And I always want to approach those by saying, we must pay for this. It reflects our values. Now let's find out the plan how. And really that leads us to say it's time to move away from our regressive reliance on property taxes, embrace progressive tax reform. And when we're talking about making investments, it's something that I might bring up if we're talking about environment or health or justice or just about anything. but it's really understanding that access to broadband and cell coverage in this state is absolutely and has been an equity issue, not a luxury investment that it's so often framed as. So I think it's safety in mind, and when keeping in mind spending, what parents want to hear is that we are going to continue to support the educators and the people who are already working with their students, who are continuing to provide fantastic support, and understand that the educators who are dealing with unprecedented conditions this academic year and in future academic years deserve our support, certainly more than we provided in previous sessions.
Tiff, what do you think? Don't forget you're muted there. Yep, there you go.
There we go.
There we go.
Well, I live with this every day because my partner runs childcare and K through 8 school, and you know, it's been an incredible juggling act, and she too is not a prognosticator, cannot predict the future. The health and safety of both families and her own faculty members is prime. And so you know, she's been kind of left on her own, as a lot of schools have been, to try to figure it out. One of the things that's really disturbed me is the way in which we have asked schools to find their own cleaning supplies, to figure out how to move kids through the buildings, how to schedule things. You know, I think that the state could play a more positive and proactive role in providing solutions to schools, because some that have property could use tents, at least for the first 3 months, and that would help relieve pressure in the building. Other schools might need to use other buildings. And, you know, it's too much to try to figure this all out on your own. And I think that that's where the State Agency of Education has to come to the fore to better support those schools. I also agree with Scott about needing to revisit how education is funded. And that, I think, is one of the things that's going to have to be brought up in the biennium this year. Do I have more time? Just 1 minute or second? I also, you know, I just heard Rebecca Holcomb say the other day that the Agency of Education really needs to reconsider what it has allowed the city of Burlington to use pilot funding for. There are needs that are in Burlington that are distinct from those in other parts of the state, especially as they relate to language and issues that they're related to poverty. And Burlington, you know, recently lost all of its a large share of its pilot funding for services that are pretty critical. And that burden then falls on Burlington taxpayers. And I think that we need to shift the interpretation of that legislation.
Thank you.
So.
Jesse, what do you think? Don't forget to unmute yourself there.
So I think this is one of those issues where we find a lot of agreement amongst all of the candidates here. One of the other questions we got was about, what is the biggest, one of the biggest impacts we thought of that has happened in the past few months. And what I, would say for that is certainly the turmoil that our kids have been thrown into, our parents have been thrown into, our educators and teachers have been thrown into. I think, and also echoing what everyone else has said, taking an investment approach rather than an austerity approach. And I want to just point out what austerity means, because I think there are probably some people who don't know necessarily what that means, and that's okay, because a lot of people don't. All that means is, instead of finding new revenue to fund programs, we say, okay, we just got to cut, and it's a downward spiral. Because in education, it's a downward spiral in a lot of ways. But one of the ways is if we are not funding our schools and the quality of our schools is going down, People don't want to live in Vermont. People don't want to send their kids to school here. So obviously, we all know we have to fund education, which brings me to the next point, which is, I think this highlights the degree to which budget is going to loom over every single issue we're talking about. And so part of the answer on this question and every other question is, how are we going to, where is the revenue going to come from to make sure we don't have to make, I don't think we should cut $1 from our schools, because kids and teachers and parents need to make sure that they're getting the resources they need. Another one of the questions was going to be about budget. I don't know if we'll get to that, but I do just want to point out there are ways to raise the revenue we need to do in a way that doesn't raise the burden on middle-class Vermonters, that just makes a lot of sense for our economy, and that will help us weather this COVID economic slump and fund these just vital programs. If we get to that, I can talk about that. But I think it's really important we center around that understanding that there are ways we can raise the revenue to do this. And that's the direction we need to go, sort of echoing what everyone says, investment rather than austerity, especially when it comes to education.
I appreciate that. Annie, this is your shot.
Thank you. This issue is extremely important to me for a few reasons, especially because it's so personal. I actually have a lot of experience working in the Burlington schools. I've worked at Edmonds Middle School. I've worked at Champlain Elementary. I've worked at Burlington High School. I've worked at pretty much all the schools, actually. After I graduated from University of Vermont, I really was thinking about becoming a school social worker. So I thought, I'd love to see what it's like to work in schools. And I absolutely loved my time in all the schools I worked with. But I also learned that working in schools can be very dangerous in terms of colds and viruses. And I truly believe that safety is of the utmost importance, even more than learning. Because the thing is if students aren't healthy, they can't go to school. And that affects not only them, but it affects their entire family. This is a COVID-19 virus that if one person is infected, that comes into the household, they're very likely to infect everyone else. And I strongly, strongly believe that I'm very supportive of obviously what parents and teachers believe too, and students. But I don't believe that it's safe for students to return back to school in the fall. I know that Castleton University, for instance, talking about higher education, they had a plan to actually have students on campus. Then they reversed that plan because they saw what was happening around the nation. I feel like we need to be really smart about this and not risk literally the lives of children and their families. And I feel like we're a creative state. We can come up with alternatives for learning, but that doesn't risk their health. And I truly believe that once there's a vaccine, which I hope comes sooner than later, that it would be safe to return to schools when students and staff are all vaccinated. In terms of education, in terms of higher education, I'm a first generation college student. I truly understand how important it is to pay for college and how important it is to have that opportunity. I put myself through my entire undergrad. Now I'm an part-time online student getting my master's in social work. I already have my undergrad in social work. And I understand how difficult the cost of that can be. And I know that there's many others who might not have come from a very rich background who need to figure out how to pay for their education. And when I'm elected, I hope to bring my experience, really teaching myself the ropes, learning how to pay for things in terms of higher education, and introducing bills that really help young Vermonters, as opposed to them feeling like, what, I just have to, I don't really know what I'm going to do the rest of my life. And as a young person, the youngest person in the race, I'm the only young woman running for Chittenden 6-5 for state representative. And I feel like that's a huge thing. You don't see a lot of young women running for office. And I hope that my campaign can inspire other young women to have the courage to run for office and for what they believe in. So thank you.
Thank you. So this logically lends itself to, and you guys are going down, whoever wins this is going to end up in the state legislation, and they're going to be dealing with budgets and COVID and all kinds of things that are down there that are just really on fire these days. I mean, these are hot topics, and I'm very curious about, a year ago, we were talking about the opiate, addiction, and we were talking about the rampantness, and we were talking about a number of things, healthcare, and whether or not we could provide healthcare to Vermonters and those things. So I'm wondering, when you go to whoever gets to go to the legislature, what is going to be your agenda there? What are the things that you want to work on? Tiff, maybe we could start with you, and you can kind of give us a feel for what is it that you really want to go after?
Well, let's just finish the work on broadband. That is critical. And I think we need to use the state's electrical infrastructure to do that. We've learned it's not just a business issue, it's an equity issue for lots of people in the state.
Hey, Tiff, why is broadband to you so important? What is it about that makes it so important to you?
Well, because we're not through COVID, and COVID has shown to us how important broadband is to connecting communities, and also connecting kids to teachers and people to work. I think that we have learned that a lot more people can work remotely, and that's only possible if you've got access to broadband. That makes it possible for people who are trying to take care of children. It's easier for them to be able to work remotely. And I just think we have been talking about this forever. And I just feel like we've got to commit now and commit to a plan. And we've been kind of expecting corporations to shoulder that burden and do that rest of the work. And I think that we can use our own electrical infrastructure to do that. I also think that I've spent a lot of time in the world of criminal justice, and I think we are poised to make some significant changes in that system, in part because of all that has occurred over the last month. We're re-looking at everything, and we could reduce our prison population significantly if we stopped holding people beyond their sentences. If we were able to, if we didn't hold people pre-trial, which is incredibly disruptive to families and to people's ability to continue to work. If we would be able to then create room for the prisoners who are in Mississippi, and that saves an enormous amount of money for the state. We need not to set people up to fail when they get out of prison. Too many of the people who are in prison right now are there for technical violations, and that's something that's not good for them. It's not good for the state. It would enable us over time to reduce the number of prisons that we have. And finally, I want to pass paid family leave. One vote short. It's time.
That's great. Jesse, you're heading off to Montpelier. What are the things you want to do?
Yeah, so I think that the issues Tiff brings up are, I certainly agree. I would be wanting to work on those as well. I think the first, in terms of legislative priority, I would begin to try to put together with working with other legislators, working with issue groups, is a Green Mountain New Deal. For this reason, a Green Mountain New Deal is a way to address the three of the largest issues of our time, and specifically this moment: climate change, accelerating the transition to clean energy, racial justice, and focusing the investments we make in clean energy on and the gains from those investments on lifting up Black and Brown Vermonters of color, and all those who've been left behind by the system as it is today. And the third thing a Green Mountain New Deal can really help us do is, as we spoke about before, taking an investment approach rather than on an austerity approach to the economic slump we're in. A Green Mountain New Deal can sort of work as a stimulus, an economic stimulus to help us get through this crisis. So, what that means, again, just to kind of summarize what a Green Mountain New Deal is, and there's other names for it. It is just a concept of tying these issues together into one big plan, one big proposal. There's also a plan which I'm signed on to called Renew New England, which is sort of like a New England Green New Deal. But again, investing in the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy, that's putting money into our economy, our local businesses, our local business owners, our local communities. That stimulates the economy. It creates growth. You focus that growth on helping with a sort of a reparations mindset, lifting up people who've been left behind, and again, it stimulates our economy. It gets things moving, and it helps us get through this crisis. So I think, if we had to pick one thing, I also say, there's so much going on, as you said, Howard, that's kind of on fire right now. It's hard, and I think we may not necessarily have the luxury of picking one priority in this moment. But if I had to choose, that I think is where, one of the first things I'll be trying to put together and working on other legislators with.
That's good. Gabrielle, what's lighting your fire?
Well, I started off saying how many different areas I'd worked in, and that I'd spent the last 20 years really focused on clean energy and river restoration, water quality, environmental management issues, because it impacts everything else. And, there are a lot of similarities between all five of us in terms of our views. I don't think there are a lot of similarities in terms of our experience. Having led 300 businesses, many, like 6% of Vermont's workforce worked in the clean energy economy. I led them before COVID hit. I've passed renewable portfolio standards. I've worked on net metering laws so people can actually, put solar on their rooftops. And Jesse's exactly right. We do need to invest, but we need to do it more historically, more holistically. My experience in the State House is we go in, my 5 years there, I would see everyone, piecemeal the budget, annual budget approach. We're not looking at Vermont, which has a population of less than 650,000 people, from a place of what are our strengths, what are our opportunities. We have a phenomenal sustainable agriculture community. We have a great, craft eatery tourism experience. And then we have from the organization that I led, incredible opportunities in green tech and in, energy efficiency, renewable installations. One example is just that we send $1.5 billion. Everybody else has heard this a few times, $1.5 billion a year out of Vermont on fossil fuels. I'm chairing Burlington Electric Commission in my day job, which is really providing expert advice to multiple states, Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense Council, in terms of how we shift to clean electricity and how we use less of it. This means thousands of jobs in Vermont. It does mean we can save and keep the money here. People are more comfortable. They're paying less for their energy bills. So yes, investing. But again, the two pieces that really, I think, frame my core thinking is, number one, our challenges are interrelated, and so are our solutions. We can't break them up anymore. And number two, what Tiff was saying, what impacts you impacts me. So it's similar to the energy world, what Tiff was talking about. We're spending money that we have in a very unwise way in terms of our criminal justice systems. We can take that money, just like in the energy sector, and shift how we use it and connect dots in different ways to invest in Vermonters, to keep the dollars here, and to just be so much more equitable and environmentally sustainable, even in terms of education. You look at higher ed. New Hampshire has twice our population, one flagship university, one residential college, and then a community college in all the different communities. I understand the challenges with paying for things and with seeing certain communities, potentially lose their state colleges, but we have to take this opportunity to revisit how we're going to educate Vermonters. Having spoken with so many Vermont businesses and led hundreds of them, I can tell you there is a dearth of training that lines up with earning. We need to really focus on how to invest in Vermont, and even in terms of, some of the budget opportunities I mentioned earlier. We have a phenomenal resource. We're one of the states that really has a place to dig in so that we can reinvest and reignite.
Thank you so much. Annie, I'm gonna throw it at you now.
Okay, thank you.
You get elected, you're heading down a mountain field, what are you gonna do?
I have a long list of things that I would love to accomplish. And first and foremost, even though these are my ideas, what's most important to me are the ideas of my constituents and what they want, because I wouldn't be going to Montpelier to represent myself. I would be going to Montpelier to represent them. And I feel like that's my civic duty. First of all, and these are in no specific chronological order, but racial justice reform is incredibly important to me. I feel like as a social worker, I've learned a lot about lifting up people of color, and I've learned a lot about systemic racism, intersectionality, white privilege, and I've never learned that stuff until I actually went to college. And I think that a lot of that has to do with you don't learn stuff like that when you're in public school or even private school, and you need to, because I feel like those kids who don't learn stuff like that and, become adults sometimes that, where they offend people of color or where they're just not considerate. And then that can really spiral out of control. I feel like police reform is incredibly important too. That goes hand in hand with racial justice reform. I think that in terms of what needs to change with the police and racial justice reform, that needs to 100% be, I believe, I believe that people of color need to, that we need to listen to their input, their feedback, because myself as a white person, I don't know anything compared to their lived experience. And as a legislator, I would solely base my own thoughts on what they tell me. And I would bring that to the table and help to introduce bills in support. I also truly believe in free college tuition. As somebody who put myself through undergrad, one of my dreams was to graduate from UVM, and I made that come true for myself. And then one of my other dreams was to go to graduate school. And now I'm a year into my program. I'm going to graduate next fall. So I know how to get things done. I'm an incredibly resourceful person, and I would love to, but the thing is no young person should have to be $100,000 in debt or however much in debt, and no parent should either. And that's just something that's unacceptable. It really is. And I truly believe that we need to have free college tuition at all Vermont schools and colleges and I'm not just talking about state schools. I'm talking about all colleges that are in the state of Vermont. That includes UVM, which is considered a public Ivy League school, and any other colleges, Northern Vermont University, well, that's one of the state colleges. But I truly believe that you can't, that just like public education is free, higher ed needs to be free as well. And hopefully we can extend that to out-of-state students, but first, absolutely to Vermonters. I also truly believe in the importance of unions. I feel like a lot of people over, I think, 90,000 Vermonters, honestly, have applied for unemployment benefits, and I'm sure the number is much higher now. That really shows that a lot of people who might have had a secure job their entire life or most of their life realize for the first time, oh my God, I'm starting from square one. And some people might have been, unfortunately, laid off multiple times. But that just goes to show the importance of unions and how sometimes you don't always think about their importance, but it's important to have a union in place so that way when things like that happen, they can help you get back on your feet. I also truly believe in $15 minimum wage. I've worked incredibly hard to pass that at the state house level, as well as to gather on a grassroots level Burlington voters' feedback and to pass that ballot advisory question and to ensure the passage of it during town meeting day in 2017. And affordable housing is.
I'm going to give Scott a chance now at this point. So thank you, Annie. Scott, why don't you give us where your vision is right now?
Yeah, so I believe the question we started off with was just priority. What priorities are we seeking to bring there? And between all the other candidates, we've now, with our powers combined, described the priorities page of my website. We've covered everything else. The one thing that we haven't discussed, and what I think makes me unique, not just in the context of this race, but in the context of all candidates, in the context of people currently serving, regardless of the level of government, is my connection living through the overdose crisis. So it's one of those things where you mentioned when things got hot, we quit talking about, right? While we've quit talking about this overdose crisis, and forgive me if I tear up, but I give myself permission. Death rates have only increased. Rates of overdose have only increased. For a while, we were seeing progress, particularly at the county level. It's time to bring those innovations to the state level. And that's talking about specifics that are really in the context of my mind and hopefully the Overton window that we embrace when we get down there is really low-hanging fruit. So talking about decriminalization of buprenorphine, talking about raising or removing the weights associated with criminal sentences for different levels of drug possession, talking about decarcerating as quickly as possible, making changes towards not just ending the overdose crisis now, but making systemic changes to ensure we don't face this crisis in the future, because we will. Because while it wasn't considered a public health crisis, mostly because of our legacy of racism in this nation, we had the crack epidemic, which was a public health crisis and did not receive a public health response. So we can't guarantee that the opioid crisis or the crisis that replaces it in public health is going to first affect photogenic young white people. And that's one of the reasons why I'm alive today, because simply I had the white privilege and dumb luck of getting passed through criminal justice systems and public health systems as I have. So the fact is, since I've entered recovery, over 800 of our friends and neighbors have died. And that issue doesn't get much attention until you're personally affected. And the truth is, this isn't some ambitious thing when I say we can end the overdose crisis. I truly believe that's something that could be accomplished in the next biennium. So it's not to say that it's the most important issue. It's certainly near and dear to my heart, but it's something that I think when we're talking about turning my pain, my personal pain into progress for the benefit of others, that's something I'm confident I could do immediately. That's not to say my lack of interest in any other priorities that we've mentioned.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. So that kind of lends me to talk about healthcare a little bit, because one of the things the legislature's got to address as we in the coming session, as well as for the future, is healthcare. And so, Jesse, why don't you start us off with some views about where you think the state should be going with healthcare and how you can help with it?
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say, I thank you to Scott for being in this race and talking about your experience, because no matter what happens with this race, what you're doing and what you're sharing your story and pushing this issue forward, I know that's something all of us really appreciate and have great respect for. So in terms of healthcare, our campaign, we've been talking about from the very beginning, what we need is a universal single-payer healthcare program. And, COVID, as we all know, has only, I think, opened up more people's eyes to why universal healthcare is so important, because it is just obscene that we have kicked in this country and in Vermont, so many people have been kicked off their healthcare in the middle of a pandemic. Because they lost their jobs. It makes no sense. And, there's a lot that we can do. I support us reopening the conversation about fulfilling the promise of Act 48 and moving towards a universal single-payer healthcare program. That I recognize is going to be a big challenge. But one of the things that I think we have to recognize is that in this moment, as people are recognizing the necessity of this kind of direction, it really is possible to open up the conversation again. And I briefly want to just point out that in our state, we did talk about this. We all know that we talked about universal health care about a little less than a decade ago. And I just want to point out that there are some clear reasons we can understand why that failed. And it failed because of a number of complications with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act at the same time. It failed because of failures of building the necessary political will and political capital to achieve something like this. But we have the reports. We know for a fact that a single-payer universal healthcare model is better for businesses, because one of the things is when you talk about universal healthcare, what everyone says is, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, the question we have to ask ourselves now is we can't afford to pay for healthcare as it is now. we're already suffering under these immense costs, and it's only getting worse. So we have to fundamentally change the model. And part of the reason we're suffering under those costs is because a third of our healthcare dollars, and we spend, I think it's close to $10,000. It's a little less than that per capita in Vermont. It's one of the highest rates for healthcare in the country. One of the reasons it is so expensive is because of how much money gets spent on the bureaucracy and the administration. Most of that, or a good chunk of that, is dealing with insurance companies. And I think almost all of us have had nightmares dealing with insurance companies, doctors, everyone. It doesn't make any sense. There's a much better option, which is universal health care. And on the way to get there, by the way, I think that's the direction we need to go. Our community health centers are a wonderful thing that we're doing in Vermont. We also need to make sure we're funding those, making sure we have more of those across the state for communities who don't necessarily have great access to healthcare in their area. That's part of the solution here.
I'm going to cut you off so we can get some other folks in. And so what do you, Tiff, healthcare, give us what your focus is on that. Thank you, Jess.
Well, I think, like Jesse, I feel that we are moving inexorably towards universal health care. And we will, it is inevitable, given the cost of health care, the complicated nature of the system, and the fact that I think more and more people are insisting this is a fundamental right. No one should go bankrupt because they happened, to fall ill or have an addiction so I think that Doug Hoffer's recent report is a good one. I mean, there's a lot in there that I would need to ask people about, but I think we need to look at the Green Mountain Care Board and One Care Vermont to understand really how effective has that been in relation to what we've actually gotten out of those programs. And I also think, we are one of the curses of being this brave little state that we are is that our numbers just make it so hard to do a lot of things that we could do were we twice the size or maybe 3 times the size. I don't believe that we have made effective use of our neighbors as partners in some of the challenges that we face. And Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont are very similar in, demographically and in many of their the challenges that they face, given how rural some parts of each state is. Wherever we can partner with others to reduce costs, we must. And this, I don't know enough about the healthcare system to know where is that most possible. But I do know that given the choice, we are more likely as human beings not to partner than to partner. We go it alone. We assume that we've got to take care of everything that's within our purview. So I think we want to make the most of having close neighbors with similar issues, and those 2 pieces, I think, will help us get closer to universal health care. I do think that it is time, as Jesse said, to just let's start again. Let's start these conversations again.
Thank you. Annie, what do you think? That your experience, or where do you want to explain to us your viewpoints on healthcare?
Yeah, I've learned a decent amount about healthcare in terms of my social work experience. I know that a lot of people in Vermont are on Medicaid for a reason, because directly, honestly, I believe related to our minimum wage and paying for Blue Cross Blue Shield or MVP or other plans just don't cut it. They meet the eligibility for Medicaid, and that's what they have. And I'm glad that they have that. But still, the elephant is in the room. We haven't done anything since Peter Shumlin dropped the ball on, single payer, which was his signature campaign promise. And then he hired an economist. I remember we were all eagerly waiting what the model would look like. And then he said that it's not going to work. It's going to be too expensive. I don't think that has to be that way. I think that there are all the other, developed nations in the world have free healthcare. Well, let's look at Canada. Let's see what they're doing. We can absolutely do something in Vermont. It's about the willpower and the persistence and reaching across the aisle. And I feel that in terms of reaching across the aisle, I've been able to do that with my political work experience, helping to raise the minimum wage, talking to many legislators, especially those who I don't agree with, and having those important conversations that are very respectful and educating each other and having more than one conversation, in fact. And I feel like that's what's going to need to happen if we're ever going to get to the point of single payer. And I absolutely believe that we will get to that point, but we need to put politics aside and realize, and honestly realize, how can you not support this when people are dying left and right in our country right now? And in Vermont, there's been over 50 deaths due to COVID, and it's not the end of the pandemic yet. And I truly support a single payer healthcare. Medicare for all is something that a lot of people know about, but I am absolutely fine with another form of single payer healthcare that we agree with in Vermont. But the most important thing is that it needs to be publicly funded and that it needs to be affordable, and everyone needs to be eligible for it.
That's great. Gabrielle?
So a lot of the folks here have said, similar themes. I think the hardest thing about healthcare is that it is so complex. When I decided to run, I called Dr. Harry Chen, who had been the health commissioner under Shumlin. And, I actually asked him, I was like, why can't we do what Canada's doing? It's like, well, Canada has a national plan and we're Vermont. So, there's so many pieces where, is it single payer or is it universal? I think we all agree that the system we currently have, where, some people are covered under Medicaid, some are covered under Medicare, some aren't covered, some are covered through their employer, that it is a broken system. There are specific measures we can take in the near term. We can, and actually the legislature was actually discussing this and making some headway before COVID hit. We can revisit the fee-for-service model. Right now, we are incentivizing hospitals to get paid for operations, not to get paid for preventative care. We do need to lower the Medicare age. This is essentially, universal health care, but for, folks who are older. We can lower that age and start to rise up on other opportunities. I think with regards to health, though, we would definitely need to go back to those larger stakeholder meetings and the discussions with experts and impacted individuals, because it is just so complex. Even the fact that our hospitals right now look at a global budget, look at a month-to-month budget instead of a global budget. So they're looking month to month whether or not they can pay their bills instead of an annual budget. But I want to say also that health is not just about healthcare. Health is about it's related to how we view mental health issues. The fact that we focus on so many things from child abuse and domestic abuse, to addiction issues, to homelessness, to how many folks are in poverty. Those are related to healthcare, and we must start to remove the stigma also associated with mental health issues. Finally, as someone with a 3-year-old who was essentially stone deaf for about a year because of some, fluid in her ears, it is critically important to make sure that we support our early childhood intervention programs, because investing in 0 to 3 means you have a high school student who can actually graduate and go to college. Lastly, I'll just say, again, our challenges are interrelated, same with our solutions. When you look at criminal justice reform, when you look at law enforcement reform, there is so much that needs to be done in both those areas. And much of it comes from poverty, lack of affordability, lack of ability to actually pay one's bills. And ultimately, it becomes a mental health and therefore a health issue that we end up paying for in the wrong way.
Thank you so much. Scott, you get the last word on healthcare here. Tell us what your thoughts.
Sure, thanks. I mean, I'll cut it short. I feel like Gabrielle just captured most of my life story with that answer. This is personal to me just because certainly when I was at my lowest point through my experience living through the opioid crisis, I was without a home, without food, without income, without health insurance, certainly access to care. When that changed and I had the opportunity to go into treatment, a much longer story than we'll do today, I also witnessed the failures of these systems as they're designed to work, witnessing people bounced from treatment they desperately needed to unsafe environments for technical violations, for criminal issues that shouldn't have been criminalized, for insurance companies simply not caring. And of course, when you add the component of race into that, everything leads to greater discrimination, greater disparity. Basically, you are witnessing your peers work through systems that are actively trying to damage their health or actively trying to take their rights away. So that's why it's important to me that we do move to a model of universal healthcare as a right, treating that as something everyone deserves and making that a reflection in our budget. I'm certainly agnostic in terms of the solution, be it regional or state. I personally lean towards regional solutions, citing Tiff's own good explanation of just our population constraints here. But the question that was originally posed to us was, what's next? So being not a healthcare expert myself, I turned to my wife, who said I'm not allowed to call her an expert, but she is a nurse and doctor of nursing student. I butcher that, soon to graduate. And I asked her, what has changed in your experience in the wake of COVID or among your colleagues, or what are you seeing at sort of a systems level? And really, it's been an expedited move to telehealth, to providing prescriptions or follow-up information or getting appointments done over the internet and mobile locations. And so if that's a trend in the future, that's exciting because that suggests, people who do have access to care might get better quality outcomes, more equitable treatment. Certainly, if we don't change the underlying infrastructure to make that possible, we could be heading on a path where higher quality care, or certainly as standard practices perhaps move to more telemedicine-based modes, that we are going to be doing harm to our neighbors who don't have access, again, as we've said many times, to the high-speed internet and cell coverage that we enjoy ourselves here in Burlington for the most part. So really, it's anticipating that change on the horizon. And as we've said, recognizing the interconnectedness of these issues and understanding that internet access moving forward is really going to have a serious bearing on health outcomes.
I appreciate that. That's great. We've now reached to that point where everybody can get 2 minutes for a final statement. It's interesting, Scott's whole idea of telehealth, and then you put that with Tiff's broadband thing. Everybody seems to be kind of reinforcing each other here. It's pretty amazing. So, Tiff, I'm going to allow you to start us with your closing statement. You get a couple minutes to tell the voters what your final thoughts here.
Sure. Well, first, I want to thank those of you, the hordes that are watching this right now. And I want to thank CCTV for doing this, because I think it's a great public service. I want to thank my fellow candidates. I think it really speaks well of our district that 5 people stepped up to run for office from our district, 3 from the very same street, no less. And I really have enjoyed hearing what you've had to say. I think we're at a crossroads right now, and we can act from fear, or we can assert a vision what I have missed from Montpelier is a vision. What are we actually shooting for? What is the Vermont that we want to be? And what are the values we want that Vermont to reflect? The process of articulating that vision has to engage not just people in Montpelier, because that's a very insular world, but the creativity that lies in throughout the state. We have a lot of really interesting people who have founded wildly successful companies, or people who have deep experience in community organizing, or in meeting the needs of certain kinds of populations. So we need to tap into that creativity and talent. And if I have a second gift for the revolution, it is that, I was a teacher, and I always looked for whatever was special in a person. So if she wasn't good at history, maybe she was really good at basketball. And so I go to her game. And I have been able over time, because I definitely don't have all the answers, and I don't have most of the answers. What I'm really good at is finding the people who probably do have, at least they know some piece of the elephant. And together, because it's gonna take all of us together, I think we can shape that vision for Vermont, and I hope to be part of it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Andy, you're next.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate very much everyone who's watching this, and all the Chittenden 6-5 voters, all the Burlington voters, and all Vermonters, as well as CCTV. So I wanted to just, before I talk about my closing statement, to just touch on a few other things I didn't get a chance to mention about my platform, and things that are important to me and that I will work towards for you. Food insecurity is a huge issue in Vermont, especially as shown through the pandemic, when thousands of people are lining up for the Vermont Food Bank sites in conjunction with the National Guard. Affordable housing, especially in Burlington. As somebody who's rented for many years, I know that firsthand. Paid family leave is extremely important to me, especially with this pandemic. You want to make sure that your children, that your grandparent, that your family, that your parents, that your sons and daughters are going to be safe, and that you will still have an income while you care for them. Broadband, like Tiff mentioned, that's incredibly important. And as shown through, if we're going to really get through this pandemic, including having people even attend televisit appointments with their doctor, they need to have broadband. And mental health and substance abuse services, absolutely, as a social worker, that's one of my top priorities. And that is just as important as physical health. In terms of, I believe that I have a proven track record. I've devoted my entire young adult life, my entire 20s, since 2011, to being involved on the local level in Burlington, on the statewide level. Local level with Burlington's Fight for 15, statewide level, advocating at this legislature. I know a lot about how to make bills, how bills are crafted, how to talk with legislators, how to get community feedback. I've also worked for Senator Bernie Sanders twice as his youth outreach coordinator in 2018. And then also in 2016 as a paid intern for him. And that has been monumental. He's one of my greatest inspirations, Senator Bernie Sanders. I also am lucky to have other mentors, especially someone who's very special to me, who's a legislator herself, who inspired me to run, actually. And I believe that in terms of, I'm the only young woman running for office in this Chittenden 6-5 district. And I truly believe that my campaign will be an inspiration for other young people. And adults, I hear them say this all the time. You can't just tell people to get involved politically. I've learned that as Senator Sanders' youth outreach coordinator for his campaign. You have to reach out to them. You have to invite them into the political process. You have to believe in them. And lastly, you have to vote for them. They're not going to believe you if you just say, get involved. you have to vote for them. And I truly would be humbled and honored for your vote. And I encourage you to Google my name, to look at my track record, read articles and interviews about my work, and make your decision from there. But I know that you will absolutely see I'm an incredibly hard worker and a very devoted person and a social worker. And I'm more than happy to bring your voice to Montpelier with every vote I take. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Scott, this is your shot.
Sweet. Thanks again for everyone who tuned in tonight or who is going to be watching in the future. The South End hasn't hosted an election like this in quite a while. I always get it flipped, but it's either 12 to 8 years for either or the last contested primary or the last contested really general election. It's been a pretty sleepy district for the most part. I jumped into this race despite the long odds, despite the two incumbents still serving, because I believe, based on what the legislature has accomplished or has not in the past few years, you, the person watching this, regardless of where you are, I'm pretty certain you deserve better. I know from experience that the progress I want to see, that I want to see on your behalf, that I want to see for our communities, for my mom, for your children, won't be realized unless there are new voices at the table. I've done my part to try as an advocate to craft legislation and resolutions, and I've been tokenized and treated as a prop. Now it's time for a change. It's time to bring authentically new experiences, new leadership, new perspectives to the State House. And you have that opportunity this election. And I hope it's something that you'll consider when, just to save us all the trouble, you flip over the back of your ballot to find this race and cast one of your two votes. If you have any questions before you do, I'm accessible 24/7, and I mean that. Constituent service doesn't have to wait until August 12th. Please do reach out via phone, email, text, social media, whatever works for you. We'll find a time to chat. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Gabrielle, this is your last 2 minutes here. Give the voters what they want to hear.
Okay. Well, I think it'd be pretty hard to be a voter right now because I think all five of us have similar areas of interest in similar directions. I think ultimately you have to look at our experience and, do your homework. Look at our websites. Mine is stebbinsforvt.com. I think it's really important also to look at who's in the State House right now. It's interesting to hear people talk about the need for broadband and how hard it is to homeschool. I have homeschooled. I've been working full-time, homeschooling, running a daycare, and also a short order kitchen. I now know how to do so many short order meals. I am living that. There are very, very few people in the State House who, number one, have kids under 18, let alone 10, let alone someone who's in a diaper. And I think that's critically important to have that voice there. Not that other voices aren't important, but it's really important. My passion stems from, looking at the hope and the future that we all know, all five of us know, is here, both in our neighborhood as well as in the state and in the country. My vision is holistic. It is comprehensive. It understands that our solutions come from looking at our challenges in an integrated way. And I think critically, my skill set, my experience, yes, I have the vision, but I also have the pragmatism. I have the budget management experience. I have the facilitator, the stakeholder experience. And finally, yes, having worked in the State House for 5 years, I know how it works. I know what's working well. I also know what's not working well. Happy to also see from the local government area, the Burlington Electric Commission, my role there as chair. I'll just leave it at, ultimately, we need such different thinking. We need other voices in the State House, and we are in this together.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Jesse, you get the last slot tonight.
Wow, and it's the last slot of the last forum of this election, so it's a lot of pressure. And since it is that, I do think it's worth just thanking Mary Sullivan and Joey Donovan for the hard work that they gave to our put in for our district and for our state over the past their entire lives. So thank you to both of them. They've done some, I think, really great work, and I know are missed and that will be missed in the State House and in our community as leaders. Again, also want to echo that it's really it is an honor to be involved right in the middle of this democratic process unfolding. The ideas being shared from everybody, the stories being shared. I also have great respect for all my fellow candidates. So, as I started off by saying, we launched our campaign around the idea of it is possible. And again, what that is about is just reminding all of us that every time we try to make a big change, whether it's in our society, in our community, in our state, in our country, and also sort of in our own lives, there is resistance, there is doubt, there is a voice that says, oh, it can't be done, you can't do it. And when we say it is possible, what I've been saying from the beginning is whether or not we win, if we can get more people saying in their minds, it is possible to change, it is possible to do these things, that's a win for our campaign, because that is the kind of mentality, the kind of thinking that we need right now, and that I think this moment really calls for. So that's what this is about. That's what our campaign is about. Reminding each other, reminding ourselves that big changes are possible. And if, we talk a lot about what we believe in. And the thing that I believe in, I think most, I've been thinking about this a lot as we have to go through, doing all these forums and, writing stuff online. And I think the thing that I believe in most is how much we are capable of changing and how much we are capable of doing when we really work together. As Tiff mentioned, building that vision, having a vision, using creativity to build that collective vision and share that collective vision. That's what this is about. It is possible to make these big changes we're talking about. And it would really be an honor to serve the South End, to serve Vermonters, bringing that sort of thinking to the State House, and to serve our community and to serve our state. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You've been watching Town Meeting TV, and the state representatives for Democratic representative from Chittenden 6.5. I want to thank all of you. I can't tell you, this is a very rich group of people here. You have a very difficult choice to make, Chittenden 6.5, and I think you are very lucky to have all these great candidates. I want to thank all of you tonight for coming in. You can watch this recorded program on cctv.org, and please tune in to find other forums as we get to the fall as well. Thank you, candidates. Appreciate all your time. You guys were great. Appreciate it. We'll say goodbye.
Bye.